If you are like me, you had big plans this weekend, and those plans included testing out Fable 5 to its limits. However, all our hopes were dashed when the US government issued a directive to Anthropic to pull those models. Now, it's really important that we understand that the directive itself was quite nuanced. It didn't say pull it for the entire world. So we are going to explore what happened and why it happened and what's potentially next. It was really funny because as soon as the model came out, I was testing it anyway, so I've had good use of it for a couple of days. And then this weekend, while I was in the middle of building something using Fable 5, my access got cut off, and it happened so abruptly. And I thought that, oh, it will come back, so I kept pressing. And I kept pressing, please come back. And it didn't. So at that point, I decided I'd do some research and found out that this very, very interesting things that are happening related to this directive. And there's lots of wild theories that I worked through and scenarios that I was thinking through. So I thought I'd put together my take on it, and I'm really keen to hear what everyone else thinks of this as well. The anatomy of a directive. The directive came through at 5:21 in June 12th, Eastern Standard Time, I believe. So what's happened was that the Amazon CEO, I've got some notes here, which is why I'm looking down, Andy Jassy, who's Amazon CEO, he got on the phone with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, that Amazon's own researchers had used a series of prompts to get Fable 5 to hand over information that's useful for cyber attacks, material that should be absolutely off limits because it's dangerous. So when Amazon researchers were able to jailbreak it, Amazon boss got on the phone with the Treasury boss. A few days earlier than that, someone called, I think, Pliny the Liberator, also posted on X saying that there is a way to jailbreak Fable 5. So it's not like an isolated incident, it seems. So what happened then is that the White House, of course, met. It's an urgent situation. Anthropic was notified. And then, of course, President Trump signed off, apparently, reportedly, with some reservations about hurting innovation. So he had some reservations about this directive. So the critical nuance for me here is that the order itself had a narrow scope. So the White House asked Anthropic to block foreign nationals, foreign governments, companies, and individuals from accessing the models. But Anthropic didn't have the ability to separate or identify US users from foreign users. So it had no other option but to shut the models down for everyone globally across the board. So whatever Fable 5 sessions were going on fell back onto Opus 4.8. And the other Claude models remained open. It's just that the Fable 5 got pulled from public use across the board, even though the White House asked for foreign nationals to be blocked out. So that's what happened. I think that's pretty interesting. And as soon as the news broke, of course, there was a large number of theories floating around. There was some theories that it was an anonymous tip to the White House. It's not. It's the Amazon CEO who made the call, and the chain of unfortunate events that followed after this. It's pretty well confirmed now. And of course, we also know about that public jailbreak that was posted on X as well. What is very interesting for me, it might not be that interesting to other people, but it's very interesting to me, was it actually quite serious? Because Anthropic reviewed this jailbreak, this flaw, and they said, we think that this response is a bit disproportionate. So let me see if I can find their own words here. Anthropic's defense, they're saying that the jailbreak was essentially asking the model to read a code base, sounds normal, and fix its security flaws, which still sounds like an ordinary development task. And Anthropic said in its announcement on their website, they said that GPT 5.5 and other public models do exactly the same. That's interesting, somewhat alarming, but interesting, because if they're saying it wasn't that big of a deal, when the White House asked them to fix it, you'd think that they would go, yeah, sure, we'll fix it. We'll potentially pull the model off either for a few hours or a few days until we fix it, we get it tested, we make sure that that jailbreak has been addressed. That hasn't been the conversation. The conversation has been Anthropic saying to the government, you're overreacting. Other models can do this too. This is a normal thing that could be done. So what are we seeing here? Did the government really know something that was quite dangerous, that they had no option but to ask this model to be pulled? But was it not dangerous enough for it to be asked to be pulled off across the board? Because they only asked for foreign users to be pushed off. So there's multiple nuances to consider there. And I find it very interesting that Anthropic continues to say it's not that big of a deal. But I have a feeling that the government probably saw something, or they were advised of something that they saw was concerning enough to issue a directive in the first place. So there's a lot of things that are unsaid for me, and I don't think we will know that until one of us actually goes and sits in one of these discussions in the White House, because there's a lot of things that are unsaid here. But we are hoping that some information will emerge over the next few days. So for me, the next thing, with all those interesting questions floating around, why didn't Anthropic just say, yeah, sure, we'll fix it? And why didn't everyone just shake hands and go, yeah, that's great, it's done? That's not the conversation that's happening. So we're now potentially looking at multiple scenarios. So for me, one was that potentially this could be a quick resolution. And for me, it's looking highly unlikely at the moment, just by the read of it. But it's developing so fast, I may eat my words in the next hour or so. It's just how it is in this landscape. But a quick resolution isn't forthcoming from what I hear. And a second scenario is that there's a conditional restoration of the models to both US and foreign, or potentially they open it up just to US users and continue to cut off the foreign users. There's, of course, big impacts and implications of those decisions, so none of it will be made lightly, I'm sure. And the other scenario there is that there could be a big showdown, a bit of a legal challenge that would go on for months. So that could potentially drag things out for a while. And then, of course, that there's an indefinite shutdown, both for US as well as foreign users. And this indefinite shutdown would just trigger a lot of conversation. It would trigger a lot of implications. We are days away from that IPO. So yeah, there's a lot of implications there. And as I was alluding to before, the next scenario, the jailbreak was serious, despite what Anthropic is saying to downplay it. And that has its own implications. And this, of course, has the potential, the last scenario, for this to be a congressional flashpoint. And I will get on to what each of these means for me and my take on how it might play out. So bigger picture, of course, is that this was never just a jailbreak, that there's many nuanced, interesting layers that are happening. One was that it was the investor that made the call to the White House. So essentially, the person who's funding something, and Amazon funds Anthropic with billions of dollars, they picked up the phone and they told Washington that the models were dangerous. And someone used that word, hope I'm pronouncing it properly, Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. That's exactly what this is. The investor picked up the call and said, this stuff is dangerous. And the timing is, of course, very interesting. It's weeks before an IPO, so that has impacted the shares. So the shares have fallen in terms of the market price. And AWS is hitting its own bet. So the shutdown, of course, ripples back into AWS, which hosts Anthropic. So what I read from all of this is, if I can read anything with some level of certainty, is that frontier AI is done being defined by just benchmark scores. It is now being held to a higher standard, which is not a bad thing in itself. But again, the conversation is nuanced because they're now being asked and being looked at through the lens of trust, through regulation, through compliance, through governance, alignment with national AI strategy potentially, and your investors essentially will also be the ones who are making the call on certain things. So the wild west of frontier AI labs days, are they numbered? I'm not sure, but all I know is that there's a lot more coming into the picture for the decisions that are coming up for these AI companies and labs that make these models. So there's a lot more for governance conversation that is now far more important. So again, if we just do a bit of a deep dive on why would your own investor turn you in? Amazon plays multiple hats with Anthropic. So Amazon is an investor. They're the cloud host. They're the chip maker, the distributor, board partner, and also a rival. Amazon has what is a model called Nova, which directly competes with Claude. So when Andy Jassy made the call to the White House, he was wearing 5 hats. He was wearing these 5 hats as the investor, cloud host, chip maker, distributor. The obvious question is, so why on earth would you do something that damages a company that you poured billions into right before its IPO, when that IPO is supposed to make your stakes way more valuable? There are some explanations. So I think the most charitable reading of this would be that Amazon did find a real security problem and felt obligated to report it. And Amazon, in their own statement, said, and I quote, "It's not uncommon for governments to seek our counsel on potential security risks. The government didn't seek your advice. You picked up the phone to the government and let them know." So it's a very proactive approach there. And if your researchers generally surface a way to use a model in a destructive way, like for cyber attacks, there's a defensible argument there that you should escalate it, of course. The problem here is that Anthropic reviewed the same problem, the same flaw that Amazon flagged up to the White House. And they said, just minor vulnerabilities and reproducible on public models. Gee, thanks, Anthropic, for telling us that. There's going to be a lot of weirdos who will be trying that out on GPT 5.5. So the sort of stark difference between the responses really does raise some red flags for me. The other explanation for me, which is probably a bit of a cynical reading, that Amazon used a bit of a pretext to get back at a rival, essentially. Amazon sells its own models, Nova model against Claude model. And Anthropic's Mythos class systems were and are the most capable in the market. So taking Anthropic's best 2 products off the field, exactly when Anthropic's trying to raise public money, is a very interesting space because it's self-harming essentially for Amazon. You don't usually just torch $13 billion of your own money to slow down competition. That's pure sabotage. And that explanation just doesn't add up for me. The other option that I was looking at, the other explanation as to why would an investor turn you in, it's a lot more subtle than the first 2 options that I went through, but it's still important. And Amazon may have come to the conclusion that it should protect its relationship with the US government. So not protect Anthropic, but essentially Amazon sided with the US government and looked after its own interests, which seems quite viable. If a model is running on AWS is later found to have enabled a cyber attack, particularly with the kind of users that you could have done with Fable 5, Amazon is the host, so they are exposed. So reporting first is a way of getting on the good side of the government before the regulator comes knocking at your door. So for me, it's looking like a bit of reputational insurance there, if this is why they did it, and it's speculation. There is a tale that supports this, though. So David Sachs, who co-chairs the President's Science and Technology Council, says that the administration asked Dario Amodei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, to fix the jailbreak or pull the model, and that Amodei refused. If Amazon could see that Anthropic was going to dig in and fight the government, then Amazon, I think, had every incentive to make sure that it was seen to be standing next to the government versus Anthropic. So there might be some real power struggles going on. So it would just be interesting to see that were they willing to blow billions of dollars in this sort of, I don't know, they sided with the government essentially instead of protecting who they were investing in. Let's see, where does that leave us? Let's get on to the scenarios. The scenarios, the first one, as I said, was that there's a negotiated resolution within days. 3 to 7 days, everyone shakes hands and goes, yeah, sorry about that. Let's get this fixed. And here are the models back on available to everybody. I think what I've heard, and I'm not an expert on this, but export control orders, like the order that was given, can be lifted informally the moment the concern is satisfied. So that's saying to me that you don't need to go to court. The directive could be lifted. And I'm sure politically no one wants a very drawn-out fight either. So both sides could take a bit of an off-ramp from this conflict and save face and say, oh, it's all fine. We're all satisfied that it's safe. And then there is a possibility that this could be resolved quickly. For me, this hope is fading fast. I don't think this is the highest likely outcome anymore. When I wrote the slide deck, I really thought it would be the highest possible outcome. But it is definitely no longer looking like that for me. But of course, within an hour, I could be eating my words because things are moving fast in this landscape. And the second scenario that I had there was that we might get a bit more of a prolonged conditional restoration. So potentially you might see US only access and that consent is agreed legally. And there could be AI access becomes a bit of a national security lever. Technically, you have to share your logs and government co-regulation and all sorts of things. I think from a business point of view, it can be genuinely quite damaging because every work that these models are offline, there's the churn towards OpenAI, Google and others, the big tech in this space. And the enterprise customers will start looking elsewhere. So it can be quite damaging to Anthropic if this gets drawn out. Politically, it will set a precedent that a government can use model access as a national security lever. That's not been done before that I'm aware of. Feel free to correct me if someone's got a case study. So essentially, you have to pay a bit of a price. It can be quite intrusive, but you got to share your logs. You got to submit yourselves to ongoing reviews, effectively letting the government co-regulate what these models can do. We're on shaky territory there. There's a fine line between that innovation and the government lockdown, the governance lockdown on innovation. So I'm not taking a side at the moment, but I think it's a very challenging conversation if they do get to some sort of prolonged conditional restoration. Let's look at another scenario, the legal challenge. We will now go from looking at days or weeks to solve things into months. Anthropic may win this legally and say you made a fuss about nothing, US government, but they would big time lose commercially. And that's not really that much of a win. So Anthropic may choose to fight this out in court. I think they are already suing, aren't they? They're already suing the administration over the supply chain blacklisting. So Anthropic has been known to make a stand against and butting heads with the US government. So the legal argument could be that this was deliberate, capricious, arbitrary, whatever word you want to use, and that the administrative overstepping was done on that basis for tit for tat. And I think the government is kind of wide open to that sort of accusation. But I think courts usually defer heavily to executive mandates, don't they, on national security. This might not be an easy legal challenge at all. Even if Anthropic wins, as I said, they still lose 6 to 12 months of litigation and uncertainty for buyers and investors. We're looking at terrible commercial few months for Anthropic if this is the scenario that we get onto. The next scenario I had is that indefinite shutdown. So if we do end up on some sort of open-ended timeline where there is no timeline, and the outcomes on this, of course, are quite severe, what we might see here is that the government will hold firm. They won't flex. They will just be holding firm, and then they will continue to review, and the review drags on with no resolutions, and the models can never really meaningfully return because they're essentially shut down indefinitely. This is a tough one. So I think as a business, it's terrible for Anthropic. The frontier positioning that justifies their valuation kind of would collapse at this point. And the researchers who would have joined specifically to build those frontier models, they will be heading off to OpenAI and Google and other places, or maybe head off to China. Geopolitically and internationally, those foreign, we're foreigners because we're outside of US, those people will not wait. They will move on to other models, to other providers, and that migration could be permanent. So it radicalizes this whole industry against this sort of intervention. The thing is, the frontier just continues to move. It's not frozen. It will continue to move. It's just that Anthropic's going to pay a heavy price by the time, if Fable Mythos comes back, the competition's next generation models could have already surpassed them. So even a win after indefinite shutdown it's still not a win, unfortunately. Is this our last scenario, hopefully? Yeah, so if the jailbreak is actually serious, in that case, the government side of things, the government discussion is then bulletproof. You can't get back at the government after that. And any lawsuit that Anthropic might file is redundant at that point, or it would just get quietly withdrawn. And the worst part for, I think, Anthropic as a brand is that they are built on safety leadership. So a real safety failure that could have had catastrophic or critical risks to national security, that is a big challenge for their brand, for Anthropic's brand, and for their value proposition, essentially. So politically, it's a win to anyone who's asked for mandatory pre-deployment government reviews and a bit more of governance heavy-handedness, which will then become quite viable if this jailbreak is proven to be quite serious. I'm still hoping that what Anthropic said about GPT 5.5, which is Anthropic were pointing to GPT 5.5 and said, but you could do that with that. That's not really much of an argument, though, is it? But I think they were saying that to just showcase that they're on solid ground. It's not just something that is at fault with us. There's other models that could do this. For me, that's not a great argument, but we'll see how that conversation goes. last scenario, of course, is that this could become the congressional flashpoint, right? You will be looking at new frameworks, governance frameworks, statutory frameworks, government authority to pause deployments, mandatory written evidence, and appeals processes, which, to be honest, is close to what Anthropic is publicly asking for. And they could be lobbying, and officials are, I think, already signaling that other frontier labs may not have the same issues, right? That to me is quite interesting. So was Anthropic then singled out? And I think this is kind of signaling us towards a permanent shift in the norm, which is pre-deployment briefings with the government. Is that going to be a standard expected part of the shipping of a frontier model? The sort of deeper point here is that the relationship between frontier AI and the state did just change permanently. For me, the landscape kind of changed. Government can be quite heavy-handed from this point on, particularly if that threat, that jailbreak, was quite serious. Then no frontier lab will be able to treat government mandates and clearance and reviews as an afterthought. They will have to comply with so many things before they deploy something. And that has also its own implications as well. So where do we go from here? When I wrote this, I really thought that scenario 1 and 6 could happen together. So scenario 1, if you recall, is that the technical dispute could be resolved in a couple of weeks and everyone shakes hands and close the gap and models return. I no longer think it's possible. So unless I have to eat my words in an hour or maybe in a couple of days, I'm totally okay with that. It's just that this landscape, it is moving so quickly, and there's obviously lots of discussions. There's a lot of pressure on Anthropic, on even the government and Amazon. There is a lot of unanswered questions. So there's pressure from all sides. So a quick resolution might be still quite unlikely. And what I said as scenario 6, which is that this incident will reshape AI governance, and then we'll get to a point where no lab deploys without modeling this sort of risk. That is what I have for you now. If you have any questions or if you have different views, I would love to hear. This is a fast-moving situation, but that it's also going to take some time to resolve. And if you think that I haven't explored something, I'll be keen to hear from some of you who want to explore this with me. But otherwise, I enjoyed being able to do this instead of my original plans, which was to play with Fable 5 in the weekend. But instead, I sat down just tracking down all the stories about what exactly may have happened. So anyway, if you have any questions, let me know. Talk to you soon.